Now, in the vaccine space, we're seeing something worse in a way than just banning research. We're seeing the secretary support research that actually is going to come up with the wrong answers. Literally, we're worried that that is what is happening with some of the studies that the secretary is pushing forward. Is that happening in this space too? Is it, or is it just like, no, we're not studying this at all? Because in a way, I mean, not studying it is terrible, but saying you can't study it, but here are my favorite people who can, and we're going to fund that, and they're going to come up with the answers that we like. Is that happening, or is that the next step, or how is that working out?
Well, I have seen calls to study regret and detransition alone. And while I actually support the idea of studying detransition and people who experience regret, by politicizing this issue, in fact, people who regret the care are also afraid to come forward and speak about their experience because they don't want their experience to be used against trans and gender diverse people in a way of legitimizing the banning of their care. So what you do see are the people who do come forward and want to talk about their experiences are usually those that are a select group of people that have significant frustrations with their mental health providers or their medical providers. And we see a select group, a subgroup of regretters or detransitioners that are contributing to the science. So in some way, yes, there's a parallel process going on with what you had just described about autism and the vaccines. But I would say here it's the politicization of this issue really muddies the waters.
Mm. Yeah, and I've seen to extend that analogy, I've seen that sort of play out with people who said things to me like, "Oh, I had a reaction to a vaccine, but I also know that that can happen in 1 in 10,000 people, and that it saves lives. And so I don't want people to get the idea that vaccines are bad, but at the same time, they wanted to understand what happened to them. And I think that the way the conversation proceeds and the tone and the affect does give away a lot. You would think it shouldn't. It should just be the data. But again, as you kind of point out, people don't want their stories to be miscontextualized, misused, and I
Mhm.
could see that being a barrier to investigating issues that matter rather than something that would facilitate it.
And also, the same holds true for those whose care is being removed from them and the negative impact that that has on their lives. Parents are forced to have to choose between either telling their story and showing up and showing the world, look, this is what's happening to me, this is what's happening to my family, or put their kids' safety and privacy at risk. And so we don't hear the beneficial stories of gender care for minors because parents are afraid that the government is going to put them on a list, or
Mm.
that they're going to be criminalized, or that their kids' privacy and safety is going to be compromised. And so i- the whole political aspect of all of this is so much more complex than it needs to be. And these policies that are being enacted are premised on the idea that being trans in and of itself is not even a valid identity experience. And that's at the root of all of this.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's sort of been the theme of this administration is they come with an answer that they know, quote unquote, and then they line up everything else to fit that. And as we know, that's not really how science works. I do want to spend a little time just getting everyone up to speed on some of the legal aspects that have happened. Obviously, I know you're not an attorney, but you follow this as closely as anybody.
Mhm.
Tell us just a little bit about your read on the Supreme Court decision and some of the actions that the Trump's Federal Trade Commission has have taken.
Well, any decision, whether it's the Skirmetti Supreme Court decision or even these somewhat bogus hearings that are taking place in the Federal Trade Commission, any decision or outcome that reinforces a very absolutist answer, like ban care or care shouldn't happen, I would ask anybody of sound reason in mind to think through: is an absolute answer to a complex decision the right approach? Uh, this should not be all or nothing. We should be able to, what and what I've described in my past op-eds is, if you think about this in terms of type 1 and type 2 errors, we can minimize both type 1 and type 2 errors with how we practice medicine, not whether or not we practice certain medicine. And so these decisions, calling this medicine or this care fraud, or saying that states have the right to ban a treatment when it has clear when we've had clear benefits demonstrated in a select group of transgender and gender diverse young people, these seem to be political and not necessarily rooted in science.
One thing that we see happening is what I've referred to as sort of a chasm, sort of two Americas beginning to develop, and but not rich poor, but rather sort of evidence and science based versus not. And in some areas, this won't affect each other. It doesn't bleed over borders, but in some it very much does. And it depends on, for example, with vaccines, it'll depend on the pathogen, right? So if you have a measles hesitancy in one state, that will actually eventually affect the neighboring states as well. Whereas things that are a little less transmissible, it's kind of an insular problem if that state wants to go in that direction. But one of the troubling things I think I'm seeing here and that I'd like you to comment on is that even in places where I would have expected care to proceed as usual in the trans, or not even trans, in the gender affirming space, that we're seeing programs shut down, and UCLA and other enclaves, places that I figured, okay, it's going to be hard for someone who's seeking care in some other part of the country, but not in some blue enclave like UCLA or others. What do you make of that?
I think that the again, the politicization of this issue, even in blue states or so-called safe states, is very much a tragedy at this point in time. Um, Hospitals and institutions are forced to choose between which patients they need to serve, and unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, they're choosing to treat and protect the most amount of patients that they can. And so if they're faced with the decision that their Medicaid funding will be revoked, if they provide gender affirming care to minors, whether they're in a blue state or red state, that's an awful position to have to be in if you're an institution. So I do think that this is an unprecedented attack on um, on science. It's an unprecedented attack on patient care and parent rights, and we're witness to it every day. And I've seen the impact, the horrific impact that this has on everyday American families, families who simply want to receive their care and get back to their livelihoods and their lives. And um, the most important part about gender affirming care that I really want to remind people about is that once young people receive gender affirming care, what that does is it makes gender less relevant an issue that contributes to their overall mental health and well-being. They have the chance to be people who experience other mental health issues just like you and just like me. And so it doesn't necessarily prevent a mental health issue, but it's certain in the absence of gender affirming care for minors, young people have very difficult time flourishing. And we just want productive members of society who are living their lives authentically and without issue. And unfortunately, the politicization, both in red and blue states, is creating major hurdles and traumatic experiences for families across the country.